I had a real life once. A job.
Ash to price check 4.
Hardware, aisle 12. Shop smart, shop S-smart.
I had a wonderful girlfriend, Linda. Together we drove to a small cabin in the mountains. It seems an archaeologist had come to this remote place to translate and study his latest find. Necronomicon Ex-Mortis, the Book of the Dead. Found in human flesh and inked in blood, this ancient Sumerian text contained bizarre burial rites, funerary incantations, and demon resurrection passages. It was never meant for the world of the living. The book awoke something dark in the woods. It took Linda. And then it came for me. It got into my hand and it went bad. So I lopped it off at the wrist. But that didn't stop it. It came back. Big time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me I have Steve Vona. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, Carlos.
Today we're going to be examining one of the most anticipated horror films of this spring, Evil Dead. Now, Evil Dead is a brand that we are both very familiar with, and not too long ago we found out that they were going to do something with it. We were all hoping that maybe they would continue in the manner they had in the past with the, the previous director, the previous star. But this time around, they decided to take a different route, and that is of kind of remaking the film, rebooting it almost in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So before we start talking about the film itself, which was promoted as the most terrifying film you will ever experience, that's a lot to promise.
Sure is.
Let's talk a little about where it came from and what is the Evil Dead trilogy, if you will. Steve, I remember, I could be wrong, but I think I might have found out about this film through you.
Well, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's certainly something we discussed heavily back in our college days. And it was something that myself and another one of our colleagues, Steve Laux, were huge fans of the original trilogy directed by Sam Raimi and starring Bruce Campbell. And I had certainly been very well acquainted with them. The first two, which came out before we met, when I was in high school, and friends of mine who were interested in horror films kind of pushed them on me. And I have to confess that the first film didn't really grab me. It was the second film that really sort of got my attention and got me into Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell and Evil Dead. The premise is, in the first film, that these teenagers go to this cabin and they find the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. And when they, recite its passages, it awakens something out in the woods, some kind of spirit, demon, whatever you want to see, whatever you want to call it, because you never see it. And the first film is much more straight up horror. And, it was actually shot over the course of years. I know it came out in 1981, but I want to say that they started filming it in either 78 or 79.
Wow. And
it was really, Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, Scott Spiegel, just a group of friends, and Sam Raimi's brother, Ted. But, the film, when it finally did come out, really was a sort of underground phenomenon. And I believe even Stephen King kind of gave it his stamp of approval. And, it's a scary film. It's really where, you first see Sam Raimi's creative visual style. That I think is something that has attracted all of us who are interested in these films.
And it also belongs in a different category of horror films. It's not a standard horror film for its time. You could kind of say it's in a different category in terms of, I don't want to say it's kind of like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre type of thing, but it's got that edge to it, that like you have a standard horror film, and here's a horror film that goes a little too far on certain scenes that makes it even more disturbing than a typical film.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we're talking about the first one, absolutely.
Yes, the first one.
I think the first time I saw it, and, I was not really quite into horror as much as I later became. And I think it kind of grossed me out and turned me off.
Yeah.
And I guess I just wasn't ready for it.
It's almost kind of like I said, in the category of, what is it, Last House on the Left and
like those really
the Hills
disturbing.
Have Eyes and those weird Wes Craven-y type of films.
Yeah, because like some really, really nasty stuff happens in it. And stuff that you're kind of like, really? Holy shit.
Do you really need to do that?
Yeah. And, and they certainly referenced that in the remake. But
Oh, yeah.
it wasn't until Evil Dead 2 where I really, sort of jumped on that bandwagon because, you could even call 2 a sort of it's like a half sequel, half remake of 1. And there's a lot more humor interjected into it. And
you could say it's a lot more people friendly.
well, yeah, but it's this weird mix of horror and comedy that I think sort of started that particular trend, even though Nightmare on Elm Street at that time,
Right.
that the franchise had sort of kind of
And we're not talking
veered.
about black comedy here. It's a completely different flavor we're talking about.
Yeah. But they had sort of been going in that direction at the time. But I don't think anybody ever did it as well as Evil Dead 2 did. And
It almost has a cartoony comedy feel to it.
Well, I think you think of that because the way Bruce Campbell is so abused in the film reminds you of a cartoon, reminds me of like a Looney Tunes kind of situation with like Daffy Duck or the coyote getting the crap knocked out of him. And that's basically what happens to Bruce Campbell in the film. But, it comes just close to going over the top and doesn't quite go over the top. It just kind of straddles that line and it works. And I loved it, from like day one, the first time I saw it. And it's funny because I've probably seen that, I don't know, 20, 25 times maybe. Whereas I've only seen the original Evil Dead. I would say at the most, maybe I've seen it 5 times.
Wow.
And that made me want more. And it was a little bit of a wait, but we finally got what we now know is Army of Darkness.
Which is unusual that they walk away from the Evil Dead title.
Right. Although in some markets, it's called the Medieval Dead.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So, some places in Europe.
Now, this one really amps up the comedy.
Yeah. And it's interesting because all 3 films are, I would say, almost different genres. I mean, this is like fantasy comedy.
Yeah.
It's with little teeny tiny bits of horror, but not a lot.
And what's funny is also that I don't think anybody could have ever anticipated that the first film would not only give you 2 more sequels, but that the sequels would go in the direction they went with the character that they went with. Because I would never have expected this movie to be about Ash, all continue with the Ash. Obviously, after the second one, yes, but from the beginning, that
Right.
Ash would be the lead character in the future films.
Right.
That's unusual.
Yeah. And really, Ash only became center stage because, Evil Dead 2, I think they really, wanted to cut back on the amount of actors they had in the film. And, Bruce Campbell is friends with Sam Raimi and he's a producer on, the films. And, I think they just said, okay, we're going to make it all about you now. Plus, there's no denying that Bruce Campbell, the actor that we love, has a certain charisma that, really kind of shows through. And maybe you didn't see it as much in the first Evil Dead, but you certainly saw it in Evil Dead 2.
Yes.
And everything he's done since then. And in Army of Darkness, he just goes, he just goes full bore. He's essentially playing 2 characters in the film, and he just completely cuts loose.
Yeah.
And he's brilliant. And he's the guy, like, he's our guy of you and myself and Steve. We've all met him and, we just love everything he does.
And if you think about it, even though he's had a very long career afterwards, everything is built on these 3 movies. His reputation, his charisma, everything comes from these movies.
Yeah, it's true. He really seems to appreciate it, and he does conventions, and, he's always talking to the fans, and he's never forgotten that. Even though he may get sick and tired of people asking him about Ash and Evil Dead 4
When's
and
the
all this
next
other
movie
stuff.
coming out?
Yeah, but he's so hysterically funny that he always manages to,
Every time I've seen him on conventions, it's he does a one-man show.
Yeah.
And he completely destroys the audience, and they love it.
Yeah. They did a special screening of this year's Evil Dead, and I saw the before and after Q&A where they were pretending that they were going to show his Evil Dead, and they ended up showing the new one, and he just slays them. He is hysterical. And, you know, it's really like it's a Q&A, and you barely get, people get questions out, and he just makes jokes out of it all because he's answered them so many times.
Yeah. Well, what's funny because, I knew this movie was coming out because they started announcing, okay, we're going to do something. We're going to do something, and it's going to be completely different. You've never seen it like this before, and we're going to just throw everything, but the kitchen sink into. Everything's going to go into this movie. Okay, well, great. Let's see what happens. So I remember at the last New York Comic Con I attended, there was a panel for this movie, and Bruce Campbell was there, and Jane Levy, who is the star of the film, who plays not the Ash character, I guess.
No.
She's the female lead, really, like in the classic film. And the director, whose name is Fede Alvarez. Which I have a funny story to tell you about later. And they were there at a panel, and they were premiering, I believe, the full R-rated trailer. So I'm there with my son and I think two of his friends. And everybody get the crap scared out of them because the trailer was so gory and suspenseful that it was like, oh my, they're like, we're not watching. No, you guys are not seeing this. There's no way in hell you're going to see this movie. And there's a scene in the trailer where what looks like to be some possessed witch type of person is cutting their tongue with a electric knife.
Yeah.
Like a turkey cutter. And everybody was just screaming. And it was like, what the hell did we just see? And then they do the Q&A. And Bruce Campbell's there wearing his typical red suit jacket.
Yeah.
And they're asking questions about the film to the director, and he basically takes over. Bruce Campbell takes over the panel, and even the actress, the star of the movie, starts giving him like dirty looks every now and then because you start to get the feeling that she wasn't expecting him to be such a character, on stage when it came to these things. The director was just cracking up because he was seeing what was happening. And I was like, any minute now, this woman's going to walk out and just leave because he was just tearing apart the audience, tearing apart everybody. It was wonderful. It was just so entertaining. I'm sure some of these might be on YouTube. If you guys have a chance, go click on them and look for any Bruce Campbell appearance or panel because he is so funny. It is ridiculously how funny he is.
He is. He has that gift. And it's funny. The only time I ever saw him in person, he was extremely subdued because he was being interviewed for his new book, and he was being interviewed by a priest. And I think he didn't really quite know how to behave.
Oh, boy.
And so he was very kind of reserved. He did joke around a bit, but he kind of took it all kind of seriously. And,
wow.
It was incredible to be in the same room with him in sort of an intimate setting. But yeah, he wasn't like what you see on these convention videos and stuff. I love him. And I can picture this actress being pissed off, but, having him there in any capacity is going to help.
Well, and the other thing is that up to this moment, even through the convention, people would ask, do you have a cameo? Are you in the movie? No, I'm not in the movie. I'm just a producer and I'm supporting, the blah, blah, blah. And he was there doing his shtick, the usual. So the movie finally comes out. And now I went to see it probably the first week it came out. And originally I didn't want to go see it. I usually don't go see horror films, like really like nasty kind of horror films. I'd rather watch those at home in a safer environment. But I went with a buddy of mine, our friend Steve, and it was basically what I expected in terms of they took this franchise. It's almost like they translated it into a modern, serious horror film where they stripped away all the comedic, funny humor stuff and stuck with just the horror.
Yeah.
Which gives it a different flavor. Obviously, it's the story. You can't get away from the story. It's Evil Dead. Everything happens exactly the way you expect it to happen, but in a modern fashion. The first thing I noticed, I remember when I'm watching the movie and they approach the cabin, and in the back of the cabin or on the side, there's an old car. And I'm like, I go to Steve, is that the car? He's like, yeah, that's the car. That's got to be the car that appears in all the films. But like I said, they do follow the beats of the movie. Now,
yes.
Is that what you found?
Yeah, it definitely did. But I don't know. And sometimes I think I'm getting old and I don't know what it is. But because I used to have a sort of an iron constitution when it came to gore. But I found myself being like really repulsed by what I was seeing and almost like kind of turning my head away from it. And here's the thing. There have been a lot of movies in the last few years that have been sort of, and we really haven't discussed them. It might be something worth having a separate discussion about, but movies like Insidious and Sinister, these horror movies that
Oh, I haven't
really
seen those two. I'm going to have to put them on my Netflix queue.
I mean, they scared the crap out of me.
Oh, good.
And they're not really gory. And that was, my feeling, in this movie, like what they did with Evil Dead was, yes, they stripped out the comedy. Okay, fine. I can deal with that. Then they amp up the gore, but I can't tell you that I felt it was scary, which I would have appreciated, but it was just excessively nasty. The scene with the tongue cutting and all this other crap.
I had to kind of turn away a little because it was I couldn't take that too much of that.
Oh, that was just over the top. And again, believe me, I've seen it all. Anybody who knows me knows that I've watched just about everything under the sun. And again, I feel like maybe I'm just getting too old for this shit. And I was.
Well, you're Riggs or Murdoch? Which one are you exactly?
Yeah, I'm Murdoch. And I'm saying to myself, this is too much. But I would have been okay had it been scary. But I just felt it was sort of like you had all the typical beats that you have in a horror movie, in sort of a cliched horror movie. And let's face it, I knew what was coming. Well, not completely knew what was coming because the end kind of really turns the whole thing on its head. The showdown, so to speak.
Yeah.
And stuff happens there. I mean, she's dead and then she's brought back to life and then she's, fighting this, I guess, demon version of herself.
Yeah.
Is that what that was?
I guess.
And
or she finally let the demon come out or something. I don't know.
Right. So they did kind of switch it up, which is fine. I'm always happy to see that in a remake because there are so many remakes now. But, in my opinion, they oversold the film. I had friends who were like, this is going to be epic. This is like the horror movie of the ages. And yeah, they had good trailers. They had a good marketing campaign and they had Bruce Campbell out, pushing it to the masses, but it didn't do it for me, like on any level. And I was disappointed. Yeah. Very.
I wasn't as happy as I thought I was going to be. And granted, like I said before, I don't usually go see like hard horror films in the theater. I rather watch them at home.
Yeah.
But yeah, something like this, you're kind of going through the motions because you know everything that's going to happen because they pretty much stayed with the story the way it was.
Right.
You knew the tree scene was going to come and they did it in a modern way. Obviously, they can't go too far, but you know exactly what's going on right there and then.
Yeah.
And the way they dispatch of all the different characters, okay, different kills, if you will.
And you had the wine cellar scene and all that stuff.
The book starts to behave in weird ways, and the
chainsaw.
It's a lot of creepy jump up moments, but nothing very. I don't want to use the word creative because it's almost insulting to say the movie wasn't creative because it's creative in how they did things in a modern fashion, but they had to keep it exactly the same way too. It's really weird.
But when you're using the word modern, you're basically saying gorier, nastier, more disgusting.
Yeah, and then the film takes place today instead of in 1978 or something.
Right.
So
now, do you want to talk about whether or not this is a remake or a reboot or a sequel?
Let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Well, I think it's interesting because before I saw the film, there was discussion about if this was successful, and part of me hopes that it was successful enough to kind of go this route. That there's a buzz that there's going to be an Evil Dead 4 or an Army of Darkness 2 or whatever the hell you want to call it.
And a sequel to this.
Yes.
2. And
that what end up happening is the story of Ash and the story of, what's her name?
This girl.
would converge in, like a mashup, which I don't know how that would work, but I mean, there's been serious discussion about it. And Sam Raimi, he dropped out of doing the sequel to Oz the Great and Powerful, and there's really nothing on his plate as a director coming up. So there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not...
That's very interesting because I don't think that's ever been done before, right?
No.
2 franchises that are doing 2 versions of the same thing and then converging.
Well, here's the thing, too. There's the tag, the Easter egg at the end of the film, which I got to tell you, as just an aside, the theater that I saw it in had a power failure during the credits. So I didn't get to see it. I had to see a shitty cam YouTube thing.
That I probably sent you.
Yes, you did. And it sucked. because that was the one thing I was looking forward to.
That was the best thing, because the people, first of all, the people that stayed are the hardcore people.
Yeah.
And the second you hear his voice, everyone was like, yeah!
Yeah. But
let me ask you a question, because I don't remember. Obviously, this film starts off with something that happened to some woman that the family brought her to that basement to burn the witch out of her or whatever.
Yes.
The original film, because I don't remember it that well. Is it similar to that, where it starts with some kind of an exorcism?
No, there's none of that. Now, here's the thing. There's nothing that would prevent this movie from being a sequel or a continuation set in the same universe as the 3 films before it. It could be the same cabin. It could be the cabin supposedly is destroyed at the end of Evil Dead 2. Well, actually, no, I don't think you see it destroyed. You see Ash get sucked out into the time vortex.
Hey, it showed up in Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, right.
As far as I'm concerned.
But so the fact that Ash shows up at the end of the movie in sort of with no context at all, there he is, turns and says groovy, and that's it. And he's obviously an older man. So who's to say that basically what happens with the book, it's predestined. Whoever finds the book, whoever shows up at the cabin finds the book, this shit happens.
Well, or is Ash or Bruce Campbell at the end of this movie supposed to be the audience member next to you?
No, I don't think that at all.
Or is he watching the story, because they were playing, remember, I don't know if you got to hear this, but while they're playing the credit roll, they're playing this audio thing of a doctor from the other movie, right?
Right. Yeah, so my take on it is that this is Ash, that this is the same universe, and based on what they said they wanted to do with the franchises, that it's like, okay, here's Ash, we're going to make a movie about Ash, we're going to do a sequel with her because she survives, and, we're going to, somehow bring this all together and connect it. I'd be fine with that because I'm all about, more Ash, more, Army of Darkness, done by Sam Raimi.
If they go if they go this far, Raimi has to be at the helm.
Well, Raimi has to do the Army of Darkness sequel, and then, does that mean Fede Alvarez does the mashup? Who the hell knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I hope they get that far. It would be great if they each get a sequel and then they do a third Convergence.
Yeah.
But at this rate, you never know. They might just have to go for the Convergence next, period.
Next. It's hard to say. I don't know who has the rights, because Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness are all films split. The rights are split. It's not like Fox, where they have the rights to...
because this particular one was distributed by Sony and TriStar.
Yeah.
It's like, holy smokes. And the studio, according to what I see here, is Ghost House Pictures Film District. I don't know what...
Ghost House Pictures is Raimi's production company.
Okay, but who put up the money for this?
Well, I guess, maybe Sony.
Huh, good question.
Yeah, so
we'll see, I guess. The other thing I wanted to mention also is that the director, I had no idea, I didn't know anything about this. Even when I went to Comic-Con and even after I saw the movie and all that stuff, the director apparently came out of nowhere, basically, because he did a
short film.
A short film about robots taking over the city.
Well, have you seen it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
It's incredible.
It's great. And apparently somehow some big shots, I could be wrong, but could it be possible Spielberg got involved there somehow or something? Somebody saw it and said, you're coming to Hollywood. And the guy actually is from and shot the whole thing in Uruguay, where I was born.
Oh, that's wild.
I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, yeah, I do know those locations. I'm looking at it. I'm like, yeah, I'm familiar with those locations.
Oh, that's a pisser.
And I'm like, holy smokes. I never knew there was somebody who actually got all the way this far.
Yeah. Oh, good.
But it would be interesting to see what he does next. I mean,
yeah,
based on that little short film, it's like, I wouldn't expect him to do a horror film. I thought they would make him do some kind of sci-fi film or something. But I
don't know. I mean, I think the way I saw one interview with Bruce Campbell where he said they just found him, they grabbed him, and put him under contract before anybody. It's almost like they kidnapped him.
Yeah, like they threw him in the back of the van and they, okay, welcome to Hollywood.
So who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And like you said before, I don't think it was, I don't know how successful it was. I think it made a pretty good chunk of money. It's not a blockbuster. Obviously, it's a spring film. It's a horror film. Horror films are not usually blockbusters. But I think as far as horror goes, it did pretty well for a horror film.
Yeah, look, even though I wasn't too keen on it, I'm all for it being successful if it gets these other films made.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, I would like to thank you, Steve, for joining me today for our Evil Dead discussion. And thank everybody for listening. And hopefully we will see you here next time at Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Nosferatu, Veranda.
David. Please. Please. You have to get me out of here.
Leave this book alone.
No. You don't understand. There was something in the woods. And I think it's in here with us now.
You're all going to die tonight.
I read a passage from that book. I released something evil. Oh my God! Why did you do that?
We're gonna get you, not another pee. Time to go to sleep.
Stop.